speaking to Rabbi David Zaltzman, so he said I could speak about anything I want. But then last night we were having a discussion, and we came to the sensitive. It wasn't his idea, but I suggested that perhaps, based on what he was telling me, I should speak about Eruvin here, especially since Eruvin is one of my topics of interest. I wrote a sefer on Eruvin, so therefore, I assume that based on what I heard, it's a subject of interest in Manchester. And I wanted to speak about a little about Eruvin in various different countries and issues which surround Eruvin. You have a great advantage in the United Kingdom, which is that you have very few overhead telephone cables, at least that I can see. The wires evidently go mostly underground, because in the United States, most Eruvin are built out of the pre-existing telephone cables. By telephone, I mean, when you look at a utility pole in the United States, you'll see that the top wire is an electric wire. Then there's several wires down the side of the pole. And the bottom wire is usually the telephone or cable television wire, which is what they use to make an Eruv. Now, how do they make an Eruv out of the cable television wire? First of all, it has the major problem of being Tzuras HaPesach Min Hatzad. Tzuras HaPesach Min Hatzad means that in order to make an Eruv, you have to have the frame of a doorway, a Tzuras HaPesach. For example, over here, you have a Tzuras HaPesach because you have a doorpost over there, a doorpost over there, and a lintel over the top. So you have a beautiful Eruv right here. But the Tzuras HaPesach has to have the lintel on top of the doorpost. Otherwise, it doesn't work. If you have the lintel on the side, that's not called the Tzuras HaPesach. Now, if the telephone or cable wire is running on the side of the pole, how do you make a good Eruv? So in order to do that, you put up l'chayim. Now, what are l'chayim? L'chayim means anything made out of any material. It can even be paint, which is considered then to be your doorpost. Lechi just means a pillar in Hebrew. So or make whatever. So the lechi then is under the lintel, which is on top. If I'm going too fast, or as soon as I'm clear, please stop me. Please ask my, I don't know if the British ask questions in the middle or not, but you're certainly entitled to interrupt me. They do
that on every.
So again, in order to make the Tzuras HaPesach on top properly, they have to actually put up those l'chayim on the sides of the telephone poles. Now, this is in a state-of-the-art Eruv. Most Eruvin are not state-of-the-art, but in a state-of-the-art Eruv, the lechi goes all the way up to the top to the right below the wire. Right below the wire, the lechi goes up to there, and then you have no problems. Fantastic. However, in most older Eruvin, and in many, unfortunately, newer Eruvin, the lechi does not go all the way up to the top, because we have a principle in halacha called gudasek mechitzta. What does gudasek mechitzta mean? It means anytime you have a 10 tefach, which is, depending on whether you hold like Reb Chaim Doeg, the Chazon Ish, whoever, 30 to 40 inch high structure. Let's say this stender right here. It's as if this stender goes all the way up to Rakia and is a valid wall. Now, there's a joke which I don't tell over jokes very well, and probably you've heard this one. But there was once a fellow who had a burglary in his sukkah, and he went to the police station and he asked the police station, "Was your sukkah enclosed?" And he said, "Of course it was enclosed." And the police came and they said, "What do you mean? It's completely open, your sukkah?" He said, "No, it's not open. Here's a kudasek mechitzta, here's a lavud, everything is closed up, kedasu kedin." So this is how, so Baruch Hashem, we have these concepts, halacha Moshe Sinai, of gud, lavud, dofen, akuma, various different things with which we can make structures, even if they are not apparent to the naked eye. So now, if we have this, again, stender, it says this is a valid halachic lechi. If we put this under a wire, let's imagine that these lights over here were a wire across the top. If this is directly under the wire, we have a perfect Tzuras HaPesach. So far, so good. The problem is that I don't know about Manchester, but if you go to the United States, you'll see that the electric company, obviously they're anti-Semites, they don't ensure that every pole goes directly straight. They veer in different directions. They are on sometimes very strange angles, as a matter of fact. Now, what happens with it when it's like you have a 10 tefach lechi on an angled pole? The pole is angled like this, and your lechi is up to here, 10 tefachim. So one of my first early experiences with Eruvin, unfortunately, was with a rabbi with a long white beard, and he built an Eruv like this, and I asked him, how does the good Asek Mechitza work when you have a short lechi? Does it go like this along the side of the pole and until it reaches the wire? Or does it go like this perpendicularly from the end of the pole? In other words, imagine this was on a slant, right? So where would it go? Would the lechi, the imaginary line, go on the slant together with the standard, or would it go directly up? And the answer is that it goes directly up. It doesn't go along the slant of the pole. So this I asked this rabbi about 20 years ago. I still haven't gotten an answer from him how he built that Eruv. And that Eruv, therefore, according to this Kosul Mahadra. Now, this is a problem which happens many times in many Eruvin, again, mostly in the States. Why in the States? Because here, as I said, you can't have an Eruv built of cables. It costs you a lot more to build an Eruv, therefore, in a place like this. And in Eretz Yisrael, they put up dedicated Eruvin usually around the town. If you go to Eretz Yisrael and you come through the outskirts of a city, you usually see the Eruv in front of you, which is a strong metal pole with a wire running across the top. But in America, it's not like that. So therefore, in America, unfortunately, most Eruvin are possible. Now, that being the case, in England, it's safe to say bad things about America. So it's important to understand that many Eruvin also are built kosher. They're built well. But the Rav HaMachshir of an Eruv is only the Rav HaMachshir for the first Shabbos. Because afterwards, the Eruv changes every single week. There's no chazaka on Eruvin. What does the chazaka mean? The chazaka means I can assume that whatever was the case last week continues to be the case the following week. In other words, if last week the Eruv was kosher, I can assume that the following day it was also kosher. There's no chazaka on Eruv. Why is that? Because we have a principle in halacha, chazaka asuya lishtanos, ain't a chazaka. A chazaka which frequently changes, which is subject to frequent change, is not considered to be a chazaka. That's why an Eruv is checked every week. Because, as people who know Eruvin know, anything can go wrong and usually does in the middle of the week, and sometimes even major repairs. Again, the anti-Semite utility companies, they do utility work without telling us. And therefore, very often you find that what you assumed was a legitimate Tzurus Pesach, all of a sudden does become is no longer valid Tzurus Pesach. Now, this also leads us to the other point, because an Eruv is only kosher by the Rav HaMachshir for the first week. Very often, the people who check Eruvin, Chas v'Sholom, not in England. In England, obviously, there's a lot of Yerushalayim. I have to say that because I came to two different minyanim in the past 2 days, and I came by Mizrach Shir, and I couldn't find a seat, and I was the last person who got to the shul. So obviously, you people have a tremendous sense of proper decorum, Yiras Shamayim, and impressively much more Yekish than me, who's supposed to be a real Yekah. But not all over the world are people so meticulous and precise and proper, as they are in the United Kingdom. So therefore, what happens is that you have Eruvin, which are checked by people who are not as, I wouldn't say unscrupulous, not that they're unscrupulous, but not as full of Yiras Shamayim and meticulous in their precision as you would like. So therefore, what happens is very often in Eruv, the Rav doesn't see the Eruv. As a matter of fact, there are communities where the Rav has not seen the Eruv for 40 years because they rely on Balabatim every week to go and check the Eruv. And these Balabatim, not because they're Balabatim, I don't mean to offend any Balabas, but these Balabatim do not necessarily put in the right, proper effort to check. I once went to a town, I didn't think the Eruv was kosher, but the Rav said to me, listen, you go around with me, I'll show you, I have a great Eruv now. So I have a mazel sometimes, when I get to the first pole is already possible. So in this case, we went to a pole, an electric pole, and the lechi was behind the pole, so you couldn't see from the street. So if you couldn't see from the street, the only way you can check it actually is get out of the car and walk around the pole. But that's very difficult to do, especially in the middle of the winter. So therefore, the fellow who checked the Eruv never walked behind the pole. When you walked behind the pole and looked there, you saw the bottom part of the lechi was missing. It didn't go down to the ground. The lechi has to go because of the halachas of mechitza within at least 3 tefachim of the ground, 8 inches, not I don't know, but centimeters, but 8 inches from the ground, which is there and considered to extend down to the ground. If it's above 3 tefachim from the ground, it's called a mechitza shekdoyim bokimbo, a wall through which little animals can go through, and therefore it's not a valid mechitza. Not a valid wall.
When you said that the lechi has got no chazaka, did you mean only a lechi which is built for only a lechi which is built for electrical purposes, but a lechi which is purposely built does have a chazaka? It
depends, and everything is relative, yes. I saw a few of the l'chaim here in Manchester, and they're incredibly, they're really better poles.
Yeah, but they're purposely built.
Yes, purposely built,
yes. It's got electrical move.
Right.
But where you don't move
it's probably, I have to check this here, but probably has more of a chazaka.
No. The weather, the different
yes. Again, I'm sure they check it every week.
It does.
But here, of course, what I saw, somebody invested lots and lots and lots of money into the Eruvin. I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw bits and pieces of it. You know, when you get sense for Eruvin, you no longer see electric wires. When you walk down the street, you see Eruvin. You see every wire looks like a potential Eruvin. They say that Rav Nachum Kosher is Sefer to Fanech Tzunos brings down from a story about Plato. I wouldn't know about it. Otherwise, he says that Plato was once walking down the street, was a Talmud of his, and he asked the Talmud, "What do you see?" And he says, "I see a horse." So Plato says, "You're never going to be a philosopher." And he says, "When I see," it doesn't translate well to English. As it said in Hebrew, it sounds perfect. He says, "Shani ro'eh sus, ani lo ro'eh sus, ani ro'eh et hasusiyut shebo." When I see a horse, I don't see the horse. I see the concept of a horse in front of me. So therefore, when I walk down the street, I don't see wires. I see Eruvin. So it's very, very impressive what was done here, and I rarely see such a well-constructed Eruvin. Again, I didn't go around the entire thing. I just saw here and there. So this is not endorsements nor non-endorsements, just a comment. That's what you should say. Now, continuing on with this issue of the pitfalls of Eruvin, there are other issues which come up very frequently, and one of them is the issue of karpaf, which is important to know about. A karpaf is an interesting thing. Within an eruv, you cannot have a base sign. A base sign is 50 by 100 amos, 5,000 square amos, of area which is uninhabited. Which is not, now what does uninhabitable mean? It means, according to the Gemara itself, brings down an example of zroim, an area which is planted, a field, which a farmer will not let you use for any purpose. He will not even let you walk through when things are growing there. So that is one example of a karpaf. The place can have extrapolated from this case to cases where there are areas which are impassable because they're swampy, because they're very closely packed thickets of bushes, and areas of brackish water. What does brackish water mean? It means that the water is not even suitable for laundry purposes. The Rashba says if it's suitable for laundry purposes, it's not considered to be a karpaf, because then it could be used by people of the town for that purpose, and therefore it's part of the habitation of a town. But what happens very often in Eruvin is that there is, and usually people don't notice this because it's in the middle of the area. You think once you have a valid perimeter, so you're fine. But you have to look out, it's actually in the middle of the area as well. And in the middle of the area, very often you'll find, if you look carefully, that there's some sort of creek, or some sort of pond, or some sort of swampy area, which then creates possibly the entire area. Now, in most cities, it's a bit of a problem when you come across a karpaf. I live in Monsey. Monsey is a town which is controlled by the Hasidim in Monsey. And therefore we have a nice lake called Lake Suzanne in the middle of the town, and the tourists of Pesach all around it. Because, hey, if you can get away with anything, you can get away with anything. So therefore, scenic view of him, scenic view of her. They put a Tzuras HaPesach around the entire lake in order to close it off, and so they exclude it from the Eruv, which is what you have to do if you have a karka. There are other ways, an Eruv with which I was involved, went to Chicago. So what they did is they had a very large area of thickets, so they took machetes, and they cut through every 5,000 square amos in order that there shouldn't be any spot which was impassable. So therefore, that way, and they maintained the paths in order that there should not be a bomb of karpa.
So you're saying if a carve is possible to walk through, it doesn't pass the way.
That's correct.
That's correct. That's what you're saying.
Yes. So that is an issue which happens very often in Eruvin. Another issue which happens not on the primitive Eruvin, but I was once in Eruvin in a certain town, I don't want to say where, and the Rav was very proud of the Eruvin, which he built himself with a consultation, but he built it himself. And he brought me in to check the Eruvin. So he started showing me around, and he showed me that on one perimeter he uses the side of a elevated highway. In other words, an elevated highway, and obviously it has a wall underneath it which supports it, and that wall is part of his Eruv perimeter. So then, this also happens to train tracks very frequently. So then I asked him, wait a second, does this highway, which right here is elevated, come down ever to ground level inside the Eruv? In other words, are there ramps coming off this highway inside the Eruv? And he said yes. And I said, did you make a Tzuras HaPesach on these ramps? Because where the ramps come down, that's going to be parutz l'makom ha'asur lo. There's an opening to a place which is really outside the Eruv. Because when a highway goes over the walls of the Eruv, if it doesn't ever come down to ground level, it's not a problem. It's a separate issue in and of itself. Separate domain. But if it comes down to ground level, then you have a problem. Because that is now has surmounted the Eruv. It's not subject to a wall, because it's above the wall. And it's accessible from within the Eruv. So each and every ramp in such a case, the on-ramp, they call ramps in England?
Yeah.
Okay, so you go to an exit here, it's called the junction, so I don't know whatever it was called there. So the ramp needs its own Tzuras HaPesach. And by the way, usually to put a Tzuras HaPesach on a ramp costs lots and lots of money because the Department of Transportation, at least in the United States, requires special breakaway poles, which if a car hits them, they're going to snap in a way which is safe for both the car, so that costs thousands and thousands of dollars. So he did not have those poles. That's Tzuras HaPesach. So I felt really bad for him because he built the air 15 years ago, was possible from day one. So I said, you know what? Let's call somebody and ask. Somebody else, we'll call somebody, a rabbi who has a reputation for being lenient. So he said, we called that rabbi. The rabbi said, it was absolutely possible. He has to declare in shul the Shabbos that nobody can carry it. I don't know if, I didn't ask, I don't know if the rabbi was ever been nisayim. It's a tremendous nisayim to actually say that the Eruvin, which you built 15 years ago, and people have been carrying ever since, was possible from day one. It's tremendous Yitzhar, which brings me to another point about Rabbanim in general, which is that in most cases, when an Eruv is built, if it's not possible, the Balabas is not going to burn in Gehenna, it's the Rav who's going to burn. Why is that? Because the Balabas is supposed to can rely on his Rav. And especially where it's a Drabanan, because according to most opinions, we have no, there are no Rishuyas Rabbim within our Eruvin, so there are no Doraisas involved, only Rabbanan. So there's a famous Nesivos, which says that in a shogeg in the Rabbanan, when you commit an Aveira the Rabbanan, b'shogeg inadvertently, unintentionally, you are potter, you don't require tshuva. Why don't you require tshuva? Because listen to Rabbanan is learned out from the pasuk of Lo Sasur. Do not deviate from what the rabbis tell us. And to deviate, according to Nesivos, means deliberately to not do what the rabbis told you to do. So if you transgress the Rabbanan b'shoigeg, so then, in that case, you're not doing anything deliberately to deviate from the words of the rabbis. So then, as a result, you don't require any tshuva. Even if that were not the case, we have a principle by Shabbos of misasek. Misasek means if you were involved in doing something which you thought was mutter, you thought it was permitted, based on a legitimate assumption, and it turns out actually to have been forbidden. So since by Shabbos we have a special principle of meleches machsheves asra Torah, the Torah only forbids labor with which you intended to do. Now intended doesn't mean intended to violate Shabbos. There's the concept of shogeg. Shogeg means you forgot it was Shabbos, or you forgot this melacha was forbidden, and you did it nevertheless. That requires kapara. It's d'oraisa. But misasik means you thought it was mutter because you thought there was an eruv here. You didn't think you were doing something which otherwise would have been a malacha. So therefore, if that's the case, you're again, no true is required. That's why the halacha is, this accepted halacha is, that if an eruv is down, comes down on Shabbos, we don't tell people that it's down. Because they're still misasik. They don't know, they think the eruv was kosher. They clarified it before Shabbos. The hotline, the application, whatever they use. So therefore, they're misasik, and therefore, it's not a problem. Therefore, the halacha is mekubal from Chaim Brisk not to tell people if an eruv is down on Shabbos. By the way, in Brisk, they had an eruv. That's important to know.
Even if it's just
what?
Even if it's just
no, it would be true even if it's around the Raisa, but we assume there is no Shus around the Raisa. But misasik is true by Shus around the Raisa as well. Yes.
There were 600,000 people.
Right, I'm not kidding right now. I don't know if we have time to just Rob Mitchell. You're going to have to fly me back to Manchester to speak a second time about that. But getting back to this issue of the Rabbanim. So therefore, it's an interesting issue in halacha which is brought up, which is when you give a hechsher on food. So any Rav should give a hechsher on Yisurim Rabbanan left and right. And it's no big deal because everybody who relies on the hechsher is doing it b'shoigeg, eating the food which is also the Rabbanan. So if it's only also the Rabbanan and they're eating b'shoigeg, so they're not doing anything. So why be so makpid on kashrus if you're the Rav? Just let it go and say, oh, anyway, they're not chaytek. So the answer is yes, but you're going to burn. They won't burn, but you will burn because you're the one who machshir them. So that's true also about Eruvin. The person who's machshir. There are Rabbanim HaMachshirim and there are Rabbanim HaMachshirim. The ones who are machshir you, the ones who cause you to stumble, are the ones who are going to burn as a result. So that's why I usually tell a Baal Boss, if you have a reliable Rav who said that the eruv is kosher, who you trust, your local Orthodox rabbi who's the one who passes for you, then as far as you're concerned, everything is fine. Now I have a problem, which is I know too much. Since I know too much, if once you learn too much about any topic, that's why I never studied in-depth kashrus, commercial kashrus, because I'd be afraid I would never be able to eat anywhere. That's what I've heard. That people who study kashrus know they should not eat anywhere. So therefore I have avoided that area of expertise. But again, that's only if a person is very knowledgeable. If a person is not very knowledgeable, they have a Rav who is legitimate Rav, so then they can rely on that Rav. I can't rely on that. I really have to go out and check it out myself before I'm able to use it. Again, that's just, I have to tell you, it's mentioned to somebody last night, I am not a big Baal Midos. I try, but I'm not a big Baal Midos, as big a Baal Midos as I should be. And one of my great illicit pleasures in life is the Schadenfreude, the joy in finding somebody's eruv puzzle. Because you go to the community and you find eruv puzzle. I'm working on myself. I don't get as much hana out of it as I used to. But still, there's some degree of pleasure in seeing somebody else's eruv puzzle, and it's a very bad meetup. So so again, it's important to understand. It's usually the Rav who's responsible for the eruv's kashrus and not the Baal Bas, unless the Baal Bas has reason to be choshesh. Of course, that his Rav is not up on what's going on, and that happens, unfortunately. I got a call once from a community where the eruv had been built 40 years earlier, and all the Rabbanim were involved in building it either passed away or moved on, and nobody knew where the eruv was anymore. They didn't know exactly where the eruv ran. They wanted to know what they should do since they no longer knew who it was. Now, what does it mean didn't know who it was? Because one of the things which we can use in an eruv is a telah mislakit. A telah mislakit means a natural, artificial hill, which rises up at an angle of at least 23 degrees. which is to rise up in 4 amos, 10 tefachim. Okay, so that angle is 23 degrees. So when you have a telemis locket of that sort, so then you can warn that as a wall of an Eruv. It's a legitimate wall. It's called a wall. It's actually quite difficult to walk on a hill, which is that angle. You don't realize it. You think the 23 degrees is nothing, but it is substantial and it is difficult to walk up a hill like that. So that's a wall in the hills of Eruvin. Here in Manchester, I was told that there is a cliff, which is one of the boundaries of an Eruv, and nevertheless, for reasons which are not clear to me, but they put a mechitza on top of the cliff besides that. It's like belt and suspenders, right? Besides that, they built up a wall, a fence, on top of the cliff. So, but the cliff itself would be a valid form of wall. Now, the thing is like this: if you have a riverbank, however, that's not a cliff, so then it erodes over time. And therefore, sometimes some places it's good, some places not good. It has to be checked, not once a week. It has to be checked on a regular basis to make sure that it hasn't eroded and deteriorated or shifted, or a construction has been done to the point where it no longer is valid. And in this case, they couldn't figure out exactly how the riverbank was a boundary of the Eruv, and the knowledge had been lost to posterity. So this is something which happens especially in this community in the hinterlands, for example, where I don't know the comparable situation in the United Kingdom, but let's say in America, if you have a community in the outlying region, so then what happens is that you have Rabbanim who come in for a few years at a time, just for 3-4 years, and then they move on to bigger positions. So the first year they're too involved in getting settled to look at the Eruv. The last year they're too involved in finding their new stella. So basically they never get around to the Eruv, and it goes neglected and run by the people who are not necessarily optimal for running it for many years on end, which leads to unfortunate results.
If the Rav puts a mashgiach on the Eruv, is the mashgiach responsible on the Rav?
The mashgiach. If the mashgiach, depends. If he's supposed to take all the shilas to the Rav and he does, that's the Rav. But if it's the mashgiach that decides on his own, which very often is the case, so it's the mashgiach. Well, I should say, actually take that back. Take that back. No, I'm sorry. If the Rav's name is on the Eruv, the Rav is responsible. The mashgiach's name is on the Eruv, then the mashgiach is responsible.
Even if the Rav puts a mashgiach on to check the Eruv?
Yes, as long as it's under his name, he's responsible. So, another issue which comes up in Eruvin very frequently, and I want to make it clear, the reason why I wrote this sefer, is because many people, unfortunately, involved in Eruvin think that the issue is only whether you have Rishus Harabim and Rishus Hayadim. According to many places, there's almost no Rishus Harabim in Bisman Hazeh. Basically, again, it's too complicated to get into all the issues involved, different shitas, or Moshe, the Chazanish, other opinions, but you can get out of Rishus Harabim issue relatively easily in Bisman Hazeh. But then people think that the Eruv is kosher because they don't have Rishus Harabim within the Eruv. Which is in fact not true. Usually most Eruvin are possible because they're not constructed properly. And when I wrote this book, I have Aspamas on the Sefer. I asked for Aspama from a certain Yekesh Rav, whose name I will disclose upon request, it's not important right now. And I knew I wasn't going to get the Aspama from him because he was pretty opposed to Eruvin, but I was curious about what he would write to me, how he would respond to me. And he wrote me a very nice letter back, which I still have. He said he was in Telz in Lithuania with my grandfather. I'm only happy that could, and he remembered him fondly, and that he kept me on Aspama because he holds that an Eruv can only be built if you can see all the boundaries from within the Eruv when you're standing within it. In other words, they're visible to you actually by the naked eye when you're standing all around you, like in a bungalow colony, a campground or something of that sort. That is his own personal chumrah. So nobody else writes that. And then he wrote to me another thing, which is a fascinating revelation to me. He wrote at the time. He said, he also doesn't believe that Balabatim should be given access to in-depth knowledge. You tell the Balabas what to do, and he doesn't. They should not be given access to the in-depth discussion. A very Yekish approach. And I said back to him, I said to Rabbi Flaney, I wrote back to him, I said, I understand that perspective, but you should know I'm not writing for the Balabatim who don't know Hilchos Eruvin. I'm writing for the Rabbanim who don't know Hilchos Eruvin. I did not get a response for that, but that was I wrote back. And this leads us into another issue, which is there is a very big issue besides halacha of hashkafa involved in Eruvin. And there are people who hold not al pi halacha, but al pi hashkafa, that one should not build an Eruvin, one should not use an Eruvin. Over historically, although the boundaries have been somewhat diluted over time, historically there was a difference between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, the Litvish, I should say at least. The Hasidim were pro-Eruv, and the Misnagdim were anti-Eruv. This goes back to big machlokes in the base of Prime, Mishnah B'S Yaakov, in the 19th century. Even though base of Prime was not really Hasidish, but it was Polish, so it was like Hasidish. And but there was the Rabbi Karliner writes that the Baal Shem Tov said that he came down to this world to be masaking three things. Oisiyos Zan, Zvicha, Eruvin, and Mikvos. Zvicha, the Shchita, he made, till his time, the Chalaf used to only be sharpened on one side of the blade. And now he made it takana to sharpen both sides of the blade. Man is mikvah. Until Baal Shem Tov's time, they did not use hot mikvos. You use warm water mikvahs. Baal Shem Tov was miyase that it should be used hot water mikvos, and which made it obviously a lot easier to table. And ayin is Eruvin, that the town should have Eruvin because it enhances the Yodik Shabbos and the whole spirit of Shabbos in the town as well. So since the Baal Shem Tov said that, therefore Hasidim have usually been in history pro-Eruvin, and felt that it's a positive step in the right direction, whereas Misnagdim have not necessarily had the same perspective on Eruvin, and have very often felt al pi hashkafa that it's better to keep Shabbos without carrying. Again, the barriers are blurred, because, for example, the Bavitch Rebbe wrote that people should build Eruvin and not use them. They should build Eruvin for the Mechalei Shabbos, the people anyway going to carry. Which unfortunately there are a lot of people who do that. So, but then the Frum should not use the Eruv because it's not the proper atmosphere for people carrying on Shabbos. It's interesting. I teach in a high school in the States, and once we ran a Shabbaton, a Shabbos for the Talmidim, for my Talmidim on the Lower East Side. Lower East Side has no Eruv. Rabbi is welcome. There's no Eruv there because Rabbi was against Eruvin. As a matter, generally speaking, again, sometimes halacha, sometimes against hashkafa. So for many of my talmidim, that was the first Shabbos in their lives that they were in a place to have an Eruv. They had no concept of not carrying on Shabbos, because wherever they grew up, there was an Eruv from day one. So therefore, there is such a thing that people forget that there's a prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, and it's understandable. And some Rabbanim therefore have hashkafa that it's Eruvin should not be built or Eruvin should not be used. I think I'm supposed to conclude in a few moments, but I'm happy to take questions afterwards if there are any. But just to bring in one other issue, is another issue which happens on the perimeter of Eruvin, is that there is very often an Eruv has built on two levels. And this goes back to the railroad tracks or the elevated highway. Sometimes what you have is, and again, it's something you have to have notice at the special eyeglass in order to see, is that sometimes you have something like a creek which goes under a road. Now there's a culvert, I think it's called, under which there goes a creek or a river or some sort of rivulet which goes from outside the Eruv to inside the Eruv. In some places you have, some areas are built on the seashore, and they're actually a substantial riverbank, and there actually are marinas or piers also, which are accessed under a road, over a road. So often you have to build an Eruv on two levels, and sometimes very difficult to conceptualize, because that's a piazza. Even though you built an Eruv on the road on top, even though the road on top has a wall, the fact that there's a tunnel underneath through which water runs, which is accessible, it requires its own Eruv, requires its own Tzuras Pesach. You can build Tzuras Pesach over water, it's not a problem. But you have to have a separate Tzuras Pesach for that. So again, there are a lot of pitfalls in Eruvin for which one has to be alert. And the fact that a great Rav, somebody supposed to be a great Rav, built it once upon a time, doesn't mean that it's kosher today. most Eruvin today are aging. They're even in America, the first Eruvin are 40. First Eruvin are already 40 some odd years old, and in Europe, I think they're probably significantly older. So therefore, you have to be careful. The Rav has to be careful. The Baal Boss who comes into a community has to be careful. Find the right Rav to ask about these questions in order to make sure they're carrying actually adds to any Shabbos and doesn't detract from Shmirah Shabbos. We just, again, as I said, this is a pitch for you to bring you back again to England because we just touched the tip of the iceberg here. But I hope this has been helpful, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take questions.